It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the principle of the thing. I, Arthur Penhaligon, had always prided myself on being a reasonable man, a law-abiding citizen, and a homeowner who diligently paid his dues. But the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, they were testing me. It started with the color of my mailbox. Apparently, rustic bronze wasn't harmonious enough. Then came the great lawn edging debate of 23. Each petty squabble, each condescending letter, chipped away at my sanity. But the driveway, declaring my driveway community property, after 20 years of it being, my driveway, that was the last straw. The sheer audacity, the parking chaos that ensued as neighbors suddenly felt entitled to park their Winnebagos and rusty pickup trucks on my meticulously maintained asphalt? It was an act of war. And Arthur Penhaligon, reasonable man or not, was about to retaliate. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, crisp white paper stock embossed with the Willow Creek HOA logo, 2 stylized willow trees flanking a gavel. Inside, the pronouncement was delivered with the bureaucratic coldness I'd come to expect. Citing Article 4, Section 12, Paragraph B, Subsection 7, a clause I'm convinced they invented that morning. The HOA declared my driveway an underutilized common area and therefore community property. The justification? Something about promoting equitable access to parking resources. The reality? Mrs. Higgins, bless her heart, couldn't parallel park her behemoth SUV and had complained. Within hours, my pristine driveway was a free-for-all. Rusty pickup trucks leaked oil onto the asphalt. A Winnebago blocked half the sidewalk, and little Timmy Henderson was using it as a skateboard ramp. It was anarchy, and it was happening on my property. The gauntlet had been thrown. My first instinct, naturally, was to lawyer up. I spent a small fortune consulting with Mr. Abernathy, a man whose toupee had more personality than his legal arguments. He hemmed, he hawed, he muttered about precedent and ambiguous wording. Apparently, HOAs, with their armies of lawyers and endless reserves of spite, are notoriously difficult to fight. There were loopholes, maybe, potentially, but exploiting them would cost more than the driveway was worth. Defeated, I sat on my porch, watching Timmy Henderson attempt an ollie over a discarded tire. The injustice of it all simmered. Then, a thought sparked, a glorious, slightly unhinged thought. If I couldn't fight them with legal jargon, perhaps I could fight them with, well, something else entirely. Something toothy, scaly, and surprisingly good at discouraging unwanted visitors. The internet became my new legal advisor, and its first lesson was simple. Exotic animal ownership regulations in Willow Creek were surprisingly lax. Turns out, Willow Creek had more regulations regarding petunias than predators. The HOA rules were silent on the matter of crocodilians. County ordinances required a permit for animals deemed dangerous. But the definition was vague, and the enforcement. Let's just say the animal control officer seemed more concerned with stray cats. Thus began project-scaled relocation. After a few discreet phone calls and a rather adventurous road trip involving a repurposed cooler and a lot of nervously chewed gum, I was the proud owner of Chompers, a baby saltwater crocodile. He was barely a foot long, all beady eyes and miniature teeth, but he represented hope. The landscaping would commence immediately. I ordered several tons of river rock and began digging. The driveway, once a symbol of suburban conformity, was about to undergo a radical transformation. The neighbors watched with a mixture of curiosity and concern as I transformed my driveway into what could charitably be described as a naturalistic water feature. I dug deep, reinforcing the sides with concrete and lining the bottom with a thick rubber membrane. A pump circulated water through a filter, maintaining a semblance of cleanliness. I even added basking rocks and some hardy aquatic plants. The HOA, of course, took notice. Mrs. Higgins, her SUV now relegated to the street, was particularly vocal. Letters arrived, sternly worded, demanding to know the nature and purpose of the excavation. They cited clauses about maintaining aesthetic harmony and preventing nuisances. But I'd done my homework. The enclosure met all legal requirements, barely. Chompers had adequate space, proper filtration, and a secure, if somewhat flimsy-looking, fence. They threatened fines, but they couldn't find a clear violation. The battle of wills had begun. Time passed and Chompers grew. He graduated from goldfish to chicken necks, his baby teeth replaced by rows of gleaming daggers. The naturalistic water feature evolved into something far more convincing. The aquatic plants flourished, creating a murky, verdant environment. The fence, initially a flimsy afterthought, was reinforced with steel posts and warning signs featuring cartoon crocodiles and dire pronouncements. The driveway, once a source of parking squabbles and HOA tyranny, was now a legitimate crocodile habitat. People started taking detours. Timmy Henderson traded his skateboard for a healthy respect for reptiles. Even Mrs. Higgins kept her distance. The HOA letters continued, but they were less frequent, less confident. The tide, it seemed, was turning. Chompers, the tiny instrument of my revenge, was becoming a force to be reckoned with. It was Mr. Henderson, the HOA president, a man whose pressed khakis and perpetually furrowed brow radiated disapproval. He'd always considered himself above the fray, delegating the petty squabbles to his underlings. But the crocodile? That was a direct challenge to his authority. He came on a Saturday afternoon, armed with a clipboard and an air of grim determination. I watched from my living room window as he approached the enclosure, ignoring the warning signs. He muttered something about assessing the structural integrity of the fence. Then he leaned over, peering into the murky water. Chompers, ever vigilant, saw an opportunity. A snap, a yelp, and Mr. Henderson was hopping backward, clutching his backside. The bite wasn't serious, more of a pinch. Really? But the look on his face was priceless. He'd been bitten by the very symbol of his defeat. The lawsuit was inevitable. Mr. Henderson, nursing a bruised ego and a slightly perforated posterior, sought damages for emotional distress, negligence, and crocodile-inflicted trauma. The local news picked up the story, initially framing it as a cautionary tale about exotic pets. But then someone posted a summary of the HOA's driveway declaration on Reddit, and the internet exploded. Suddenly, I wasn't just Arthur Penhaligon, disgruntled homeowner. I was Crocodile Arthur, the symbol of rebellion against tyrannical HOAs everywhere. The story went viral, shared across social media platforms with hashtags like #DrivewayFreedom and #CrocodileJustice. News outlets from around the world clamored for interviews. The HOA's overreach, once a local nuisance, was now a global embarrassment. The internet, as it often does, took a firm and decisive stance. Team Crocodile. Memes flooded social media, depicting Mr. Henderson as a hapless victim of his own bureaucratic arrogance. Petitions were started, demanding the HOA apologize and reinstate my driveway rights. News commentators skewered the HOA's policies, highlighting the absurdity of their community property claim. The HOA's website was bombarded with negative reviews, their Facebook page filled with crocodile emojis. Local businesses refused to associate with them. Even Mrs. Higgins, whose parking woes had started it all, publicly denounced the HOA's actions. The pressure was immense. The HOA, once a bastion of suburban control, was now a pariah, drowning in a sea of public ridicule. Mr. Henderson's bite had inadvertently bitten them all. The legal fees were mounting. Mr. Abernathy, smelling blood or perhaps just fresh scales, reappeared, offering his services at a discounted rate. The HOA's insurance company, facing a public relations nightmare, threatened to drop them. The pressure became unbearable. Finally, a truce was called. A team of lawyers, looking haggard and defeated, arrived at my doorstep, bearing an olive branch, or more accurately, a cease and desist order for Mr. Henderson and a proposal for mediation. They wanted to find a mutually agreeable solution, which, translated from legalese, meant they were desperate to make this whole crocodile-infested mess go away. The negotiation began, and for the first time I felt like I held all the cards, or perhaps more accurately, all the teeth. The agreement was a masterpiece of legal concessions. The driveway, naturally, was returned to my sole ownership, with a clause explicitly forbidding any future community property designations. Mr. Henderson was forced to issue a public apology, retracting his lawsuit and acknowledging the misunderstanding regarding the crocodile. But the real victory was the clause regarding HOA reform. They promised to revise their bylaws, limiting their scope and emphasizing homeowner autonomy. Future regulations would be subject to a community vote, and a grievance committee would be established to address homeowner complaints. It was a complete overhaul, a dismantling of the petty tyranny that had plagued Willow Creek for so long. And it all started with a crocodile. With the battle won, it was time to address the matter of chompers. While I'd grown fond of the scaly little guy, okay, not so little anymore, I knew Willow Creek wasn't exactly the ideal environment for a full-grown saltwater crocodile. After consulting with wildlife experts, I arranged for his relocation to a reputable sanctuary in Florida, where he could live out his days in a more suitable habitat. The pit, now empty, presented a new opportunity. After a community vote, the first under the new HOA rules, it was decided to transform it into a community garden. The river rocks were repurposed as borders, and raised beds were built for vegetables and flowers. The former crocodile pit, once a symbol of conflict, became a symbol of unity, a testament to the power of community and the absurdity of overbearing regulations. I became something of a local celebrity. People stopped me on the street, thanking me for standing up to the HOA. The local newspaper ran a feature story about my triumph over tyranny, complete with a photo of me watering the community garden. I even received a plaque from the Willow Creek Residents Association, declaring me a champion of homeowner rights. The vindication was sweet, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever felt stifled by bureaucratic overreach. My little act of rebellion, fueled by frustration and a surprisingly lenient animal control ordinance, had sparked real change. And while I never set out to be a hero, I was happy to accept the title. After all, it's not every day you get to save your neighborhood from an HOA with a crocodile. The story of the Willow Creek crocodile pit became a legend. It was cited in legal journals as a cautionary tale against HOA overreach. News articles appeared periodically, recounting the saga and highlighting the importance of reasonable regulations. Other HOAs, undoubtedly terrified of facing their own Crocodile Arthur, began to reevaluate their policies. The lesson was clear. Unreasonable rules, enforced with bureaucratic zeal, can have unintended consequences. And sometimes the most effective solutions are the most unexpected. Who knew that a baby crocodile could be such a powerful force for change? The saga served as a reminder that even the most ordinary person, armed with a little creativity and a lot of determination, can stand up to injustice and win. Life in Willow Creek returned to a semblance of normalcy. The HOA, humbled and reformed, focused on more pressing matters, like organizing neighborhood barbecues and planting trees. Mr. Henderson, still sporting a slight limp, avoided eye contact whenever we crossed paths. And me? I enjoy the peace and quiet, tending to my tomatoes in the community garden, a gentle smile playing on my lips. Every now and then, I catch myself reminiscing about the whole absurd saga, about the infuriating HOA letters, the parking chaos, the frustrating legal consultations, and, of course, Chompers, the unlikely hero of our story. And I think to myself, sometimes the most ridiculous solutions are the most satisfying. After all, who needs a therapist when you have a crocodile and a little bit of righteous indignation?